Cold doesn't announce itself with drama. It creeps in, patient and methodical, long before your teeth start chattering. The real danger begins when you still think you're comfortable. That's how it worked for soldiers in frozen forests and families in drafty cabins long before electricity made warmth effortless. They didn't wait until they were freezing to react. They prepared their sleeping space like a defensive position because they understood something most people today overlook. Survival in the cold is decided before you fall asleep, not after. For most of human history, nights were not a time of rest, but a test of endurance. The temperature dropped, fires burned low, and whatever warmth you had managed to trap became your only line of defense. There were no second chances. If your setup failed, your body paid the price slowly through the night. That's why entire generations developed a system that looks simple on the surface, but is rooted in deep understanding of physics, materials, and human biology. This is not about comfort. It's about staying alive in conditions where modern systems fail. Whether it was a soldier trying to survive a winter campaign or a family enduring months of freezing nights, the principle remained the same: build your warmth deliberately or lose it completely. What they created was a method, an old bed insulation layout, that turned even the coldest rooms into survivable spaces using nothing more than elevation, natural materials, and controlled airflow. What matters is not how many blankets you have. What matters is how you use them. Once you understand that, you stop fighting the cold blindly and start working with the same rules that kept people alive for centuries. Most people blame cold air for making them freeze, but history tells a different story. The real enemy is beneath you. The ground doesn't just feel cold, it actively drains heat from your body through conduction. The moment you lie down on a cold surface, your body begins losing energy at a rate you cannot sustain. Soldiers learned this brutally during winter campaigns. Those who slept directly on frozen earth didn't just wake up uncomfortable. They woke up injured, sometimes permanently. The ground pulled heat from their bodies faster than they could replace it, and no amount of covering on top could compensate for that loss. That's why elevation became the first rule of survival. Old beds weren't tall by accident. They were designed to lift the sleeper away from the coldest layer of the room. Cold air settles low, forming a dense, invisible pool along the floor. Rising even slightly above that layer places you in warmer air that your body can influence. Pioneers understood this without formal science. They built raised frames, used rope beds, or even improvised platforms. Anything that created space between them and the ground made a measurable difference. That empty space acted as a barrier, slowing the transfer of heat downward. The lesson still applies today. If you are ever stuck in a cold environment, the first improvement you should make is not adding blankets on top but insulating underneath. A thick layer beneath your body, whether it's clothing, plant material, or even simple padding, will protect your heat more effectively than stacking covers above you. Heat lost downward is heat you will never recover. In extreme cold, not all materials behave the way you expect. Thick fabrics can fail when compressed. Wet insulation can turn from protection into a liability. This became painfully clear during harsh winters when soldiers discovered that their issued equipment sometimes worked against them. What saved them wasn't advanced technology. It was something far more basic: straw. At first glance, straw seems insignificant, but its structure makes it incredibly effective. Each piece contains tiny, hollow spaces that trap air, and trapped air is what prevents heat from escaping. Unlike soft materials that flatten under weight, straw maintains its shape, preserving those air pockets even when compressed. This gave it a powerful advantage. Soldiers began placing thick layers of straw beneath them, sometimes inside makeshift coverings. The result was a stable, insulating barrier that could separate their bodies from frozen ground. It didn't absorb moisture the same way cloth did, and it didn't collapse under pressure. The impact was immediate. Those who used it could sleep on snow without losing dangerous amounts of heat. Those who ignored it often paid for that mistake. This wasn't a new discovery. Generations before had relied on the same principle. But in moments of crisis, people were forced to rediscover what had already been proven. It's a reminder that survival often depends less on innovation and more on remembering what works. Natural materials still hold that same power. Anything that traps air and resists compression can serve as insulation. The key is understanding why it works, not just copying the method blindly. One of the most effective sleeping systems ever developed didn't rely on complex design. It relied on controlling space. The concept was simple. Create a narrow, enclosed environment where heat cannot escape easily. Instead of spreading warmth across a large area, you concentrate it around the body. This dramatically reduces heat loss. Soldiers achieved this by forming a tight, layered enclosure around themselves. The outer layer blocked wind and moisture. The inner layer retained heat. But the real effectiveness came from how closely the system surrounded the body. There was no excess space for warm air to drift away. Inside that confined space, body heat accumulated quickly. The environment became stable, almost like a personal climate zone. Movement was limited, which prevented heat from escaping through gaps or shifts in insulation. This approach mimicked something seen throughout nature. Animals survive extreme cold by minimizing open space around their bodies. They burrow, curl tightly, and create enclosed pockets of warmth. The tube system followed the same logic. You can recreate this effect without specialized equipment. By wrapping yourself in layers that form a tight enclosure, you reduce the volume of air that needs to be heated. Less space means less heat required to maintain warmth. It's not about having more insulation. It's about using it efficiently. Inside early homes, the cold was constant. Walls leaked air. Floors held frost. Heat from a fire disappeared quickly. Yet people survived night after night because they learned how to trap warmth in a controlled space rather than trying to heat the entire room. Beds were treated like insulated chambers. Fabric barriers surrounded them, creating a smaller environment that could hold heat. Within that space, even a slight increase in temperature made a critical difference. But the real technique was in how they sealed their bedding. Blankets were not just thrown over the body, they were tucked tightly on all sides, eliminating gaps where warm air could escape. Any opening acted like a chimney, allowing heat to rise out while pulling cold air in. By closing those gaps, they created what can only be described as a thermal envelope. Inside that envelope, heat stayed contained. Outside it, the cold remained. They also used stored heat strategically. Heated stones or similar objects were placed within the bedding to release warmth gradually. This extended the effectiveness of the system long after the fire had faded. Everything worked together. Elevation reduced heat loss downward. Insulation slowed transfer. Sealing prevented escape. Each element reinforced the others. There were times when materials and techniques alone were not sufficient. When temperatures dropped far enough, survival depended on a more direct solution: shared body heat. This wasn't a matter of comfort, it was a practical response to extreme conditions. Each human body produces a steady amount of heat. Individually, it may not be enough to overcome severe cold. But combined, it becomes a significant source of warmth. Groups would sleep close together, reducing exposed surface area and pooling their heat. Within a sealed environment, that combined output created a stable temperature that could sustain them through the night. This approach was used across different contexts, from military settings to family homes. It worked because it followed the same principles as every other method: reduce heat loss, concentrate warmth, and eliminate unnecessary exposure. Even small actions supported this system. Light physical movement before rest increased body temperature slightly, giving the insulation more heat to retain. Once inside a sealed environment, that initial warmth made a noticeable difference. The idea is simple but powerful. Heat is a resource. When conditions become severe, combining resources increases survival chances. What these methods reveal is not just how people survived in the past, but why their solutions remain relevant. The physics of heat transfer hasn't changed. The human body hasn't changed. Only our dependence on technology has. Elevation protects you from the ground. Insulation traps heat. Closure prevents loss. Shared warmth amplifies survival. These are not outdated ideas, they are foundational principles. When modern systems fail, these methods become more than historical knowledge. They become practical tools. And the difference between understanding them and ignoring them can be the difference between discomfort and real danger. The people who came before didn't survive because they had better equipment. They survived because they understood how heat behaves and built their systems accordingly. They didn't waste energy fighting the cold blindly. They worked with it, controlled it, and contained it. That knowledge is still available. hasn't disappeared. It's just been overlooked. If this gave you something practical to think about, something you could actually use when conditions turn against you, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who takes preparation seriously. The more people understand these principles, the fewer will be caught unprepared when it matters. Before you go, think about this. What's the coldest night you've ever experienced, and what actually kept you warm? Your answer might help someone else more than you realize.